Emily Elizabeth, and I'm the host of the What Fulfills You podcast, a show for and about individuals always seeking to be their best selves. On this show, we talk all about building the mindset, finding the right careers, creating meaningful relationships, and so much more. Welcome to the What Fulfills You podcast. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the What Fulfills You podcast. My name is Emily Elizabeth, and I'm your host. And for today's solo episode, I am diving into everything around moving to a new city in your 20s and how to build community from scratch. The last time I spoke about this topic, I think, was probably 4 years ago when I first moved to New York. And given that it was recently the 4-year anniversary, so to speak, of me moving to New York, I wanted to bring this topic back. I know this is a big one for those of you who are in your 20s and early 30s, and you might be starting a new chapter, starting fresh. And moving to new cities is something I've done a handful of times, and one of them was prompted by going to college, but other moves, including New York and when I moved to LA, both were just random. Like, there was no external reason for me to move except my intrinsic interest to give that city a try. So that being said, I know what it feels like to feel nervous and overwhelmed on being able to meet new people. I will say, if you're moving to a new city and you work in an office or you work where you get to meet people, I think that's probably the easiest way, especially when you're out of college. I'm going to assume most of you are just starting in a place where it is just not as simple and straightforward to meet new people. And I think this is often what brings the energy down when you start to feel lonely because you don't have that feeling of connection. So there's so many different thoughts I have around this. Let's start with the physical aspect of actually having people around and people that you feel connected to. Some of the best ways I've met new people are through mutual friends and through activities that I'm personally interested in. So even now, 4 years into living in New York, I'm meeting new people constantly. And some of these new people, even if I've only been friends with them for a couple of months, they are people I consider close friends. And, I'm 28, so I'm pointing out that there are going to be people you meet later on in your life that are potentially just your closest friends moving forward. And I think that's something to consider, where maybe you recently graduated college, or maybe you're in college right now and you think that the people you know right now are going to be your lifelong friends, and maybe that's harder when you're older. And I think it just really comes down to your perspective. So one thing that I did early on was, number one, I very much went out and put myself out there. I went to restaurants by myself. Early on, yes, I went to nightclubs by myself. I went to cocktail lounges by myself. And honestly, talking about it out loud, I feel like 4 years ago, I had more guts than I do now. Not that I'm scared to do those things, but I think at that stage of my life, I was so in this mentality of, fuck it, I am going to do these things because it scares me and I'm going to do it. Whereas I'm not driven by that fear and wanting to overcome the fear anymore. So I don't know if I have the same driving factor, but all that to say, when I did that, it pushed me out to new people. It enabled me to converse with people I wouldn't normally converse with, and maybe they introduced me to people that ended up being my close friends in the future. But just going out there on my own was 100% a big push for me in meeting new people in a new city, and this is especially when I moved to New York. Backtracking a little bit, when I moved to Los Angeles, and for context, I lived in Southern California for about 6.5 years. Obviously, 4 of those years was in college. And that was also primarily in Orange County. For those of you who are not familiar with Southern California, Orange County is about 45 minutes south of Los Angeles. So it's in a different part of California. It is not the same as Los Angeles. And I specifically lived in Newport Beach, Irvine area. And I really loved it. But during the pandemic, it was like August 2020. I've given this context before, but I was, talking to someone, seeing someone at the time. He inspired me in so many different ways. I never would have thought of Los Angeles. And, we were not dating by the time I actually moved. But I remember I started to have a lot of curiosity around Los Angeles and the creative world because of this guy. He was a cinematographer. And I just remember thinking, I'm really stagnant in Orange County. I don't think this is the speed or my place that I want to be in, at least right now. And so, believe it or not, at that time of my life, August 2020, I decided to go look at apartments that weekend. And I went to Los Angeles. I scoped out Venice and Marina del Rey and then West Hollywood. And by the time I drove over to West Hollywood, I was like, that's not my area. I didn't even bother to go to my apartment tours. And the first apartment that I saw in the Venice area, I immediately knew, oh, this may be the one. And so it ended up being the one. I sat with it for like 2 or 3 days, thought about it, and then signed the lease and put in my 30-day notice in the same couple of days. And so then I moved to my LA apartment about 3.5 weeks later. Again, no specific reason. It was just because I decided to move and I decided to make a change in the fucking middle of the pandemic. Although things were like opening up and lightening up or whatever. But, again, this is still like August, September 2020. I look back and will admit I had more guts, all that. I had more balls and guts when I was younger. So I think that helps. When you're younger, you're going to just do things almost with, you don't even need the logic there. But what helped propel the move and what felt really aligned was prior to moving to LA, even though I already made the decision to move, I shortly after met a entrepreneur friend who's now one of my best guy friends. And we ended up connecting over Zoom. We were connected by a mutual friend, ironically, someone that's been on the podcast, but I've never like physically met him in person, but I've talked to him virtually. And we connected through the mutual friend and then ended up grabbing lunch in person at another point. And then he hosted an entrepreneur's brunch like 2 weeks before I moved to LA. And that for me felt like the start of a new chapter and really like pinning it on the wall, if you will, like this is it. You're moving to LA. This is, you're shifting gears, you're shifting the type of people you're surrounding yourself with. And that also became, I think, the shift of energy from working in this corporate sales life, which, by the way, I enjoyed very much so. But I knew even before going into sales, and before college, like I knew that I always had an entrepreneurial knack and I knew that time would come. And this was kind of signaling towards that, if that makes sense. And so it's funny because I go back to what I said earlier. I meet people through mutual friends. And again, that good friend of mine I met through a mutual friend of ours that I never even technically met in person before. It's like an online friend, really. Or I meet through my own passions and interests. Maybe that's a pottery class. Maybe that's a music class. Maybe that's tennis, right? Or ice skating, like coaching. When I came back to coaching in New York, which I do part-time now, I met a lot of skating friends, right? And so that is something to consider if you are living in a new city. You have to take ownership and accountability of the efforts that you put in to meet new people. And if you want to jump right into it and cut to the chase, go to the places that would likely attract like-minded people. I mean, for me, it's a no-brainer. If I go to a tennis clinic, easy. Like, I'm going to meet people that like tennis, right? I'm going to meet people that are going to be around the same level, And same thing, if you have interest in soccer and you want to join a soccer league, go and find that. Like, don't wait for people to come with you. And especially, it's easier if you don't know anyone because you're going to go in very open-minded, very fresh, and very open energetically to receiving new energy, right? So obviously those are my two methods of meeting new people. Now the next part is maintaining these connections and actually building off of them and figuring out which ones are worth keeping, which ones are worth pouring into, right? And which ones are a little bit misaligned. And it's just something that you feel. And so I always encourage, even at this stage of my life, even though I have an abundance amount of people now compared to many years ago, I'm still always open to including new people into my life, right? Like it's an abundance thing. And so one thing I would pay attention to is, like I said earlier, what are their values? And does that align and connect with me? And it's the basic stuff, right? I mean, we can start with the way they take care of themselves. You know, if you are health focused like me, you probably aren't the biggest drinker. You probably don't do any drugs. Again, no, like I'm not saying it's bad or good. I'm just saying that's kind of what happens when you are pretty health oriented. And so naturally for me, I'll speak from my lens, I'm not going to be really as open, or at least I'm not going to spend a lot of time with people that are indulging in activities that are not really activities that I do, right? And so you can observe some of that from the early few times. And again, even if you have no friends, don't be afraid to be like, okay, you know what, these people are lovely or this person's lovely, but I can just tell I'm not really a fan of that. And you don't have to like verbalize that to them. You know, you can just keep a little bit of a distance, and maybe it's an occasional thing that you know, connect with them. But that's something to keep in mind is values. So what they do, how they treat others, how they take care of themselves, what they spend time and money on. Those are things that you can pay attention to. I think another thing to consider is when you are pouring into people, don't be afraid to be the one that reaches out. Don't be afraid to be the one that initiates, hey, do you want to grab dinner? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And I even think of my own friendships. There are some, you know, not all of them, but like probably like a quarter or so, maybe a little bit less, that I would say I'm like the one leading that dynamic, and I'm okay with it. You know, I think sometimes if I know people for long enough, I know that their nature is not very good at reaching out and like doing that. And I think something I would say from like a pattern perspective for those friendships that I have where I am the one that's always initiating plans or initiating some sort of like, you know, hey, let's do this. They're always saying yes, right? They're not avoiding me. So that's also part of the context, right? Is with people that I'm pouring into, and surface level, I might think they're not pouring into me. I know that, well, every time I initiate something, they're always saying yes, or they're always trying to accommodate or trying to make plans. So I know that, you know, in that context, that's fine. But it would be different, obviously, if I'm pouring into someone and I feel like they're always finding an excuse or kind of avoiding, you know, spending time together. So that I would be like, all right, you know what, no worries. But on the flip side, of course, a great sign of potential good connection is someone that's mutually reciprocating, right? So if you initiated the first time, see if they're going to initiate the second time, or just pay attention to the fact whether they initiate further hangouts with you, because two things that come to mind. Number one, it's a shared value. Like to me, I really do appreciate when others think of me or others initiate time to connect and hang out with me. That's like a strong value of mine because I do that, right? I think I'm not afraid to hold a certain standard, because whatever standard I uphold and ask of others, I know I can also hold that on my end. You know what I mean? So I don't ask for things or hope or expect certain things that I could not do on my side. And I think that's something very important to be self-aware about, is are the things that you're hoping or asking for in friendships and connections, are you showing up like that? And that kind of goes back to my earlier point, which is don't be afraid to take that initiative, because how you show up will ultimately attract the people that share that energy, mindset, and value. And that's what I've noticed in my life, especially my friends that I've made throughout my 20s. Those that are still my friends today, those are the ones like with the shared values, and like they show up in a very similar reciprocal way. Whereas maybe, it's like the high school friends or people you've known for like 15 years, like there's a little bit more, like those friendships were different, where it's like, okay, we're friends and we're so close because we've had each other in our lives for a very long time, and there's just like a different dynamic there, but like the closeness is there. But maybe it's like, oh, not because we share the same values, but because, we share like a deep connection. You know what I mean? So that's just something I always keep in mind when I differentiate like friendships I've made in my adult life versus friendships I've made, in childhood. The last thing I will say when it comes to building a community from scratch and not being discouraged if you don't feel like you have close people in your orbit yet, especially when you're in a new city. Keep in mind that it takes time, and of course that you have to be patient with it, right? But something I would reiterate is always go back to check in on yourself and check in on how you are showing up. Because if you are finding that you're struggling even after like 9 months or a year, which again, I would say still takes time, but if you're like still really struggling after a long period of time, consider asking yourself, how am I co-creating this? How am I contributing to this current outcome, right? And you have to get really honest with yourself on why your situation is the way it is. Because maybe you are kind of avoiding going to certain things where you could meet people. Maybe you keep trying to make an effort, but then you like low-key make an excuse in the end, right? And that's something to be reflective about. I look back to, even though this doesn't relate to moving to a new city, it kind of felt that way because I moved into my first solo apartment, if you will, like my own one-bedroom apartment, a year after I graduated from college. And at that time, all of my friends moved to different places in different cities after college. And so I didn't really feel like I had close friends anymore in the place that I was living in, which is where I went to school, but everyone left. And so going into the job that I had, I was very, very lucky, even though I was not looking for it. I wasn't expecting it, but it was a lesson that I look back now, seeing that the people I met at work ended up becoming my close friends. I, of course, again, was lucky to work at a great company that attracted really great people who worked in sales and had that high energy and good energy vibe, right? And I look back and, I celebrated my 23rd and my 24th birthday with my closest coworkers. My first birthday, the 23rd birthday, it was actually with all guys, and it was all guys from my team. And my birthday was on a Tuesday, and we went to one of my favorite Taco Tuesday places in Orange County, and they all showed up. Like they were like, hey, we got to celebrate M. Let's go out to this place, and I remember that vividly. They were just so supportive and so fucking cool. Like when I look back, and then the following year I ended up having this bigger dinner, and I had two girlfriends there who were also coworkers as well. And it was just so phenomenal when I look back. And I share that because I know that if you pour into what is in front of you and the potential connections you could have, if you just make that step and you take that initiative, you can build that community. I had to build a new community from scratch after college. And I did that again when I moved to LA. And then I did that again when I moved to New York, and now my community is very much global, and I'm so lucky to say that. But I'm also sharing this from a perspective of, at one point in my life, in my 20s, I had no friends, I had no strong connections, and I had no one to call when I was feeling down. And I think that also makes a difference, is having people that you can call during these times where you don't have the physical in-person connection, it does make a difference when you can talk to people on the phone. I still talk to my friends who live in California or Texas or, wherever they are in the world. I still catch up with them on like a monthly or, every other week, just random calls, right? And so that I would encourage you to do, not just while you're building your community, but just in general, to stay connected with people that are important to you. Because at the end of the day, like this podcast, what fulfills you? For me, it is meaningful relationships. And the reason why I believe that and why that fulfills me is because the main time in my life, or times in my life, where I felt unhappy or unfulfilled and a little empty or deeply empty, I don't want to think about those moments, but when I felt that, you guys, it wasn't because I was physically lonely. It was because I was lonely inside and I was lacking connection, but the surface level connection wasn't going to do it either. I needed the depth. I needed the shared values, the helping one another, the, hey, we're going to grow together kind of vibe, and getting to experience that over the past couple of years, especially since that low point in my life in college, I look back and realize, like, yes, I've had success and, I've been able to build a sustainable life for myself as a business owner and as a content creator and all of that, and a podcaster, right? But I remember even sharing in therapy like 2 years ago during a very low point in my life too. I was telling him, I got this deal and it's a big client. And I remember I still felt empty because at the time I was, I felt very disconnected because of, just stuff that I was going through, breakup related. And I remember saying that to my therapist, and I had to dig myself out of that and remember what creates a fulfilling life, what makes me feel fulfilled, and what makes all of us feel fulfilled, whether we've learned it or not, is connection and that human element inside of us. And so if you are navigating a move or you're considering a move and this part scares you, I hope that you find whatever way it is to move through your fear and go through with the thing that you want, even though it scares you. And I hope that you go day by day and learn how to embrace the courage it takes to take initiative and to put yourself out there, because you will be like me in perhaps like a year or two from now, and you're going to be like, wow, I am very glad that I did the things that scared me, because that's how and why I have the relationships I have now. And so wishing you all the best of luck if this topic is relevant to you in your move. And as always, I love chatting with you guys. If this was helpful in any way, please be sure to let me know. You can DM me on Instagram at Emily E. Duong or at What Fulfills You. Make sure you're following the Instagram page as well. We post a lot of motivational and inspirational content, and I know you guys will enjoy that. So everything is linked in the show notes. Thank you again for tuning in today. I will chat with you all in the next episode.